stress, it has far more implications on your mental health, your physical health, than a lot of us know or want to admit to ourselves. I've seen it firsthand completely remove me from healthy conversations, healthy relationships, just health. So I've invited our guest on who's actually been a cautionary tale for how stress can really impact you. He's got a high stress job and it hit him hard, right into the hospital. So he's got a few tips and tricks for us to pay attention to so that we can have a better relationship with ourselves at work. Hold on. Hi, I'm Russell Lawliker. This is Relationships at Work, the Employee Experience and Workplace Culture podcast. Thanks for joining us once again. This topic is really, I don't want to say, I was actually going to say near and dear to my heart, but that just seems wrong to talk about stress like that. I can't tell you the implications stress has had on me outside of work, inside of work, how they've overlapped, and I am so not alone. And I love that over the last few years, especially during the pandemic, how people have been just so much more open about talking about stress, about how it impacts them in every aspect of their life and their health and their standard of living. So I had heard our next guest was doing some talks about stress because he ended up in the hospital. It got so bad that he actually had to be hospitalized. Nobody should get to that point. Nobody, no organization should allow for their employees to get to that point. We should be standing up for ourselves so it never gets to that point. And I hope some of the information that Ian shares today will help at least start some of those conversations, maybe plant some seeds at the very least. I'm excited for this one. Here we go. On the show today, well, it's Ian Foss, and here's why he's awesome. He's a director of search and rescue for Emergency Management BC. He's instructor for the Disaster and Emergency Management Program at the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology. And that's on top of more than a decade. How long have you been working in the emergency field, Ian?
It's interesting. I started right out of high school. I became a first aid instructor and a raft guide. And in between seasons, I taught first aid and then river rescue. So it started early for me, and I just continued on, just hopping to different positions that involve emergency management in some way. Basically, I talk about having over 3 decades of emergency management experience in various roles.
I was trying to do the math on your LinkedIn account. I was like, I don't think that adds up. So I wanted to throw that to you to clarify how long you've been working in emergency. I should mention, we're going to talk about stress today because it's a huge part of a lot of our lives. And you've certainly been touched by stress, and you've been talking a lot on stress a lot lately, or actually over the last couple of years. So I was really excited to have you on. The top 10 most stressful jobs, like when I was Googling around, emergency or some variation of emergency always came up in the top 10.
So to be frank, I became much more interested in it about a year ago when I actually survived a stress-related heart attack. So 49 years old, had a heart attack. And what I found after that was that fear, grief, they can cause a cardiac injury. Psychosocial stress by itself, so things like depression, stress, they can have as significant an impact on your cardiac health as high blood pressure. I mean, that to me is tremendous. When I learned that, which was unfortunately after I'd had a heart attack, so a little too late, to me it was an eye opener. So I had some time off, obviously, after that event, and I started reading up on stress. And in the time off that I had, I was able to read a lot. I was off for 6 months, and learned about what had happened. And to be frank, I was shocked. I've worked in emergency management in various roles all my life, and I had no ability to sort of contextualize this was a possibility for me. People have heart attacks. I get it. I did check my blood pressure. It wasn't high. I checked it regularly. I check it a lot more regularly now, I got to tell you. and that's an important piece, is actually checking things like that. But it's, maintaining and ensuring your body's doing okay.
I want to stop you there because I want to talk first about, well, first, this event, the event of the heart attack. Was this feeling like it was out of left field, or was this like, oh, there are some red flags I just didn't pay attention to for yourself?
I'd say both, but I can contextualize that as well. So, for me, the heart attack itself it felt like it came out of left field. I did learn some lessons, and in emergency management, we try and learn lessons out of everything. For me, it was not pushing through exhaustion. So for me, I was actually quite tired, and there was a lot of things going on. I was working very long hours, and my heart attack occurred on a weekend when I was doing yard work, which is something I do to de-stress. Just because you're on the weekend or workday, it doesn't really matter. If you're suffering stress during the week, it's compounded. It doesn't. You're not recovering on the weekend. And what I was finding was I was so tired. I was making myself so tired by basically nonstop work that on the weekend I wasn't capable of much. I'd sit on the couch and vegetate. And my wife was picking up on these things. I certainly wasn't. I was getting my exercise by gardening, which not enough. So for me, it was a slow decline, but I absolutely noticed that as I got more stressed and more tired, it just compounded on itself. It got worse, not better. I lost the ability to read. Something I do in the mornings. I was so tired I couldn't really read. I was reading for work. That's where I was spending my time reading. So I lost that thing that I do for pleasure. For me, it was too little, too late. I'd actually taken a couple weeks off. I'd come back to work. I was there for 2 weeks before I had a heart attack, and I can say that I went from completely exhausted to just tired. So when you take those opportunities to come back, you make sure you take enough time. I could have taken as much time as I required. I took 2 weeks. I went back in a classic burnout move. I went back because I wanted to make sure everybody was okay and things were moving forward.
I wanted to do this show because stress is something everybody has in every workplace, differing degrees. And sure, emergency is absolutely at the pinnacle of the top 10 stress jobs. But I just wanted to sort of go to the extreme, but sort of highlight to a lot of people that this is something that could happen to anybody in a stressful job, because we put a lot of stress on ourselves regardless of the actual job itself. I know some jobs for people that are not as, or I wouldn't see as stressful, but due to anxiety, due to the stories we tell ourselves, they make it that much more stressful on themselves. So I'm curious, what was the story you were telling yourself when you're seeing these sort of red flags and, oh, I'm fine. No, I'm fine. Just, I just got to sleep a little bit more. I just got to exercise a little bit more. Like, what was the story you were telling yourself that got you to ignore it?
Yeah, it is just that, right? I was looking around at everybody else that I was working with, and they were all working long hours too. It's hard to sort of separate yourself if you see your boss working longer hours than you are, or if your staff is working longer hours than you feel bad. You've captured something important there, and it's, if you have the ability to control something, yeah, be happy, sad about it. You can control your reaction to that. But if it's outside of that, it's crazy making to try and grab onto that and say, hey, it's going to make me happy or sad. Again, it's a recipe for crazy making, or like for me, stress, which is what I define as crazy making.
And I'm glad you said it that way, because I want to define stress. I'm going to the Google here, and it's basically saying it is a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances, i.e., he's obviously under a lot of stress. How would you define stress from your experience?
Well, it's just, I think that's a great definition. And, I'd maybe add to it a little bit, and it's what you take on. So it's the pressure, sure. But, in our jobs, and lots of them are high pressure, it's what parts of that you take on. And for me, unfortunately, like I bought in that I needed to take on more than I should have. And, I suffered for that. I'd like to say I'm reformed and I've learned, but I'm back at work now and I'm struggling with the same thing. I feel myself getting pulled into things, even though I know better. I know that if you have a strong emotional reaction, you actually double your risk of heart attack for 2 hours. So I know that if I have a strong emotional reaction, I'm risking a heart attack. And I know that. And I still catch myself going into a strong emotional reaction. I also know that type A personalities have 7 times greater risk of plaque occurring in your heart, your arteries. So 7 times the risk. So it's just understanding those pieces and figuring out ways to mitigate them. For me, I don't work more than 7 hours a day anymore. I spend a lot of time outside. I make sure I have a lunch block that gets me outside every day.
The thing is, a lot of people don't maybe connect the dots here, is that, well, there is that whole work-life balance bullshit idea that is separated, where it's not. I know for myself, I've had some hugely stressful impacts From work, sure, but also from personal relationships. And that stress has absolutely impacted me to the point of physical pain and physical impacts, and that impacts my work. I'm also curious about how you see it affect in the moment versus over time.
That pain you feel in your chest, like, you mentioned relationships and other things like that. The pain you actually feel in your chest, that is a physical manifestation of stress, what you're feeling. So it's Takotsuba cardiomyopathy. And what that is it's a buildup of adrenaline in your heart that actually changes its shape, and it hurts. That's what you feel when you feel like it's the broken heart syndrome is the other name for it. But so that's like a physical manifestation of something that like, so there you can feel stress. Stress becomes a bigger issue when it goes when it's unending. So we talk about our jobs. For me, 2017, we had in emergency management, we had a large activation for big long flood and then a big long fire. I was activated, so I was working for I don't know about 90 days in a different role than my normal role. So fairly high stress. I ended up in something called adrenal fatigue. So I had so much cortisol, which is a stress hormone, flowing that I burned out. I stopped sleeping. It affected me in all manners of my life. And to be frank, I don't really think I came back from that because we went into another season the next year and another season, and we really didn't give ourselves a break, or at least I didn't. I didn't give myself a break until after I had a heart attack. So it took a huge, very in your face, like, you need to take a pause. And that's what strikes me about this. I've been a first responder for many, many years. I've treated people having heart attacks. I didn't think I'd be the one having one ever. I did monitor my blood pressure. It wasn't high. I had definitely changed my eating habits. I'd started eating crap. I'd been sitting at my desk more and spending more time working. So, I'd pick up my cup of coffee or I'd eat crappy food. And that's not a good recipe, sitting for longer, eating crappy food, not exercising. Well, eventually that caught up. And on top of that, it's the stress hormones, things like cortisol building up in your system over time. And, then you stop sleeping properly. And when you stop sleeping properly, you stop getting rest. And, I probably wasn't drinking enough water. I can tell you after work, I sit down and enjoy a bourbon to calm my nerves. Bad idea. I now enjoy water.
I just want to really bring home the fact that anybody that's listening to this going, well, my job's not that stressful. I don't work in emergency. It can't impact me because the stress doesn't get to that level. That's why I was really curious of even low level stress or medium level stress over time can absolutely have those health impacts that you're talking about.
Oh yeah, no, it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be dealing with a monstrous emergency that, the provincial scale. To be frank, if you're, losing your parking spot for some people can be stressful enough, or being forced to go back into the office or return to work, during a pandemic. I can see how that would be stressful for people. There's a multitude of different things that can cause people stress. And it might be something so simple as you didn't get out to walk your dog this morning and you feel guilty for it. That's going to cause you stress today. And the longer things go on, the longer it's compounded. If you haven't dealt with stress, that builds up. It's not something that, you bottle this up, it doesn't get better. It ferments, for lack of a better term, and eventually the top pops off, after the pressure's built up, and something's going to happen. It's going to come out one way or the other. Stress and anxiety, they're strong precursors for things like cancers as well. So for us, we need to make sure we're taking care of ourselves and others. And that's where, spending time, making sure you're like I say, I talk to people all the time about standing up, drinking water, going outside. There's some scientific evidence about spending time amongst the big trees, that it actually helps you with the energy levels. Just going for a walk, sitting in the big trees, it helps. It's kind of funny what these are small things. They're not life changing, or they are life changing, but they're small things that that don't seem like much. That they do make a big difference. What I've seen in the last couple of years, one of the things that's increased the stress factor amongst many people, I think, is the normalization of an emergency. So with COVID, we've seen a 24/7 emergency for many different organizations. People responding to something that's different, right? This is a pandemic. We haven't seen something like this in this way since the early 1900s, and it's very different. But what's happened is the emergencies become 24/7. It just doesn't end. By definition, is that still an emergency? Like, or is that the new normal? Good question, right? Like, I don't know. But should we have an emergency stance to something like this for this long? It's hard to keep an emergency stance. It's hard on people because, you need a lot of people doing a lot of things to maintain that.
How can, say, for example, someone that's barely hanging on because their boss asked for that file with little to no direction and unrealistic timelines, so they're freaking out? How does that impact the people around them? That impacts a culture, because if you're normalizing stress, and you sort of mentioned this, if you normalize stress, then it's a matter of, you're not working, you're surviving. You're just trying to get through the day, and everybody around you, that's not a cohesive, healthy environment to work in. That's survivor. That's you're barely hanging on. So how have you seen that in a workplace? Like, I know stress is such a big factor to it, and it can hurt it so badly.
It's funny you say it like that and mention it like that, because I do see stress like that. It's contagious, for lack of a better term. When somebody is suffering something, those around them are going to start feeling that. They're going to be, well, not dragged in is the wrong word, but if someone is stressed because they've been saddled with something unrealistic, usually that's fairly obvious. And because everybody right now is stressed, I think, and you've alluded to it a couple of times, but that, like, the stress doesn't matter whether it's from home, work, play, wherever the stress comes from, it's still stress. Your body's dealing with it. It doesn't matter where it's come from. And that's the crazy piece. So if you're having a stressful life at home and a stressful life at work, that's a recipe for some trouble. For me, when I was suffering my own issues, like ending my heart attack, and I had a tremendous amount of stress at home. My son had been in a near fatal car accident. My father had passed away. In near succession, I'd had a series of things happen, and things like that just built up. And I got to say, during that period, I was in a bit of a fog. I think it was operating on autopilot, which is a stress response. I can't imagine I was super effective at work. I mean, I know that I was still at work and I was getting things done, but I don't imagine I was at my best. Knowing what I know now, I could have taken more time off than I did. I didn't. That just wasn't in my brainwaves, and it is now. I understand completely now. I should have taken time off then. It's kind of funny, because retrospect being 2020, you can look back and say, hey, and you can shit on yourself, and it's like, I should have done something back then. It does make sense to me, but I also understand there's no way I would have done that. For me, at that point, it was like, nope, I'm an emergency manager. I've got this. This is just one more thing. And I can tell you, I've learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes that one more thing is too much.
But if I take time off, Ian, then I have so many more emails to get back to. Then my job won't get done. And then my team will be impacted with all that extra work. Like, the unbelievable excuses we throw at ourselves to stop ourselves from self-caring. And then, as you are a physical representation, it can hit you later. So what are the misconceptions about stress?
Well, that it sorts itself out. If you're stressed out, it doesn't just go away. Like, you don't just wait for a little while and all of a sudden things are better. No, to be frank, with stress, you need to actively deal with it. So that's getting up, going for a walk, drinking some water, going out amongst the big trees, getting exercise. But it's thinking about these processes as well. It's setting yourself up for success. So knowing that, hey, something has happened. I've been triggered. What do I need to do? And I got to tell you, that's not an easy process. It wasn't easy for me. I don't think it's going to be easy for anyone. And, like, it's still hard for me. I'm back at work now fully. It's hard for me to unplug after the requisite amount of hours that my doctors told me to work. And like I say, it's not that, I know that it's harmful to me. I want to work. It's a weird thing your brain does to you, but it's, that's stress.
Let's shift gears a bit into the realm of what you can do about it.
Like, for me, I mentioned, I have a block in my lunch, and you can probably see my bike sort of behind me there. And so I got rid of the excuse that I used to have of not going outside because it was raining to ride. So I now have a bike trainer in my office. For me, I've put a calendar block in, so I spend an hour a day on my bike, whether it's outside or inside. And that's just for me, for my personal. I know that I need to do that. But for me, sometimes it takes getting on the bike and getting outside to realize and sort of think through it, like moving meditation style, like what's bugging me. A lot of the time, you're working, there's lots going on, there's emails, there's conversations. You don't really, something's got you, but you don't really understand what it is. So it takes a little time to think that through. And for me, that's, I get on my bike and I think. And I encourage everybody to figure out what that thing is for you, whether it's a walk, going outside and just standing by the pond, whatever it is, there's going to be something that helps you Maybe it's some time at lunch with your book, but something that you're going to do to self-relax, self-care. It's not going to be the same for everyone, but I think everyone will find that they have something that will help them.
But the thing is, you need to step away from it to identify it rather than being in it. It's a lot harder to identify such things. How often is it a daily thing to assess those stresses?
For me, I use reflective journaling. So I journal morning and evening, and I use a Stoic journal. So it tries to remind me about those pieces of things that I shouldn't buy into. It's like, for my emotional health, that I shouldn't, if I have no control over the outcome, I don't need to buy in. To be frank, that's taken me some work to get there, and I'm still working on it. But that journal is helping me. It reminds me every morning and every evening of something, and like that's to me, those little steps, they all help. And I think I'm doing far better now with stress than I was a year ago. But what I would say is I wouldn't wish what I've gone through to get to that point on anybody. The one piece I haven't mentioned, I guess, here is it's important to monitor your blood pressure. There wasn't a lot known about cardiology back in the day. So like World War II, the president of the United States, he died of coronary heart disease. During that period, his blood pressure went, it was sort of astounding actually, and I forget the range, but at the very end, it was like 240 systolic over about 180. It's like incredibly high. And the reason I mention this is my blood pressure had crawled up. I monitored my blood pressure and it was normal. I didn't monitor it nearly enough, and I freely admit that now. I do monitor it on a nearly daily basis now, so that I can see if anything's crawling up. And what I figured out is, if you are under stress, your blood pressure is higher. You can tell, even if you're not picking it up mentally, like, hey, something's going on, your blood pressure is going to tell you. So that's an incredibly important piece to monitor. I wear an Apple Watch now, and it helps me monitor my pulse rate as well. So I have an alarm on it. If my pulse rate climbs, I want to make sure that I'm aware of that so that I can go and do something to try and calm it down, whether that's meditation, getting on my bike, doing something. But for me, it's catching those things. And for me, it was, it's catching it before I get to a place where I'm going to be at risk of a heart attack. I don't want to have a strong emotional reaction to anything. I know the risks of that now, and I'm actively working to control it.
We've talked a lot about what you can do. Take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. Where the hell is the role of the organization in this? What are things they can do to help their employees manage their stress?
Where I currently work, there's emergency operations centers open on a regular basis. And then what they've done in the last couple of years is they have a clinical counselor available 24/7. So I can call or text or email and get an appointment with a clinical counselor and meet anytime I want. And if there's an expectation of performing at a high stress position, I think that's what's necessary. And, I give my employer incredible props for that. I use that clinical counselor after my heart attack. I've spoken to them every week for almost a year. And, I truly believe that they had a great part in me coming back. I wouldn't have been able to come back without that level of support. And that's due to the emergency. Nothing else. That's not a normal level of support. Regularly, we would have had, in government, we get 5 meetings any given year with a clinical counselor. That's what's covered. I needed far more than 5. I got to tell you, it's a mind bender to know that like the level of care that I received was different because there was an emergency going on. I feel very, very lucky. Frankly, it saved my life in the end. And that's the kind of thing, like, that's not a small step. That is a level of care that I haven't seen before. And I mean, to me, that it's heartwarming, and it really does help me. It makes me feel cared about because there's someone there. But having someone to talk about, it doesn't have to be someone permanent. If you have something going on, bring someone in. It's getting help in the immediate period after you've suffered something. So whether it's an immediate event or a long-term event, but when people are suffering, if you can bring in someone to help care for them as the employer, that to me is what is really required. And this is outside of, like, there's nothing that required my employer to do this. It's outside of the bounds of norm. It is different. That's the outside of the box thinking, though, that I think we need.
But you're talking about it from shit hit the fan, we got to do something. I'm talking what organizations need to do operationally. So I would almost think that just acknowledging it would be a nice first step for a lot of organizations to understand that stress is an issue that their staff go through, and that the benefits of being okay with people taking stress leave, being okay with somebody taking a mental health day, like allowing for that space to manage your stress, I think would be a really nice, well, hell, just even a first step for a lot of organizations. I want to get to the point where organizations understand it so you don't need a clinical, holy shit, that person is going to have a heart attack level. More of the what can we prevent that from ever happening ahead of time?
There, I haven't seen a lot of great examples, but what I would like to see up front is wellness, organizational wellness up front. Like that should be one of the first things that groups or organizations are doing when they start up, is figuring out how they're going to take care of their staff. You point out, yeah, I bring it up because it's an emergency, and that to me was when I needed it. I know that there's people that need this on a regular basis, and that's the piece that I think you're right, we're missing. And how do we support it? Well, that's promoting wellness within organizations, and it doesn't have to look the same. I think if we have we were to create these wellness committees, larger organizations where it's an issue, create a position, director of wellness, put somebody in charge of it, make them personally responsible for the wellness of their organization. I think you would have a very different outlook if you had someone that was actually looking at that. Because I don't think right now that's something that a lot of organizations look internally and say, hey, how are we doing? How are our people doing mentally? With COVID, that might be one of the outcomes that we might start looking at that, but I'm not sure. I do think that is something we need to be looking at. And, it's a great point that the one that I picked, of course, was the emergency. And that's because of what I do, of course.
Sure, of course. My only biggest worry is that organizations, and I've seen this because they're like, hey, take a massage or, all these, these things that help the symptoms, not the disease. Why are they getting that stressed? Where is the root of the problem versus, well, you get a discount at the gym now? What is the root of the problem? Some jobs are stressful just by definition, but they still could be reviewed from time to time going, are we doing the right things? Are we doing the right things when we should be doing the right things? Are we listening to our staff? Are we aware of all these stress triggers? Maybe they're not, because they haven't checked in with their staff because they're too damn busy as leaders. So I think from an organization standpoint, I'd like to see more disease focused than symptoms focused. So I got you near the end of our chat, Ian. You've definitely touched on a lot of things people can do. And I just want to sort of wrap it up with a bit of a summary of tangible things people can do. So I've got a couple questions. What are 3 things we all can look for in how stress might be affecting us?
Again, your blood pressure is a great indicator of how stress is affecting you. And that's something you can easily check. It's very tangible. For me, I just keep a little note on my phone and just write it down so that I keep track of it. You can even do it at the pharmacy. The place you stick your arm in, you press the button, it tells you. Just having an idea of what that is something that I as a first aider and first responder, I used to check mine on a regular basis, but not as often as I do now. It's critical that you check that. For me, the other piece is paying attention to how often I go outside. So, I work from home now and it's easy. I have a calendar alert, go outside. When I'm back in the office, is that going to be as easy? I'm not sure. But again, I'm going to use a calendar alarm to tell me to go outside so that I continue to do it. Because for me, I know that it's pretty easy to slip into the old habit of just work, grab your lunch, sit at your desk and continue working so that you get it done. We only have so many hours. So, those are the other things. And I guess the third thing, and it's super simple, is drink water. I try not to drink my calories now. I do drink coffee. I fully admit that that's rhino fuel for me. It keeps me going. There is water in coffee, so I take that. But for the rest of the day, I stick with water. It's pretty simple for me. Big 20-ounce glass of water, and I try and drink 4 or 5 of them in any given day. Simple, easy steps.
So I'm going to wrap up every episode with 2 questions that I'm going to ask as our final 2. So the first one I'm going to ask is, what's the best or worst employee experience you've ever had?
I was an employee, and the ski hill will remain unnameless, as a ski patroller way back when. And they ordered uniforms for their entire staff, one-piece uniforms, and they didn't measure anybody. So mine arrived and it didn't fit. I still got to wear it for the season though. And the supervisor basically at the end of the year tried to humiliate me because my uniform didn't fit. The one that he'd ordered me, and he hadn't asked the size. It certainly set me on a different path. I didn't want to continue in that path for the rest of my life, but it certainly taught me a lot about how to treat staff.
How long ago was that?
Oh, that was about, I was 18 years old. So I'm about 30 years.
and you're still thinking about it.
Oh yeah.
It just shows you the impact over years that people don't realize bad leaders can have on their staff on how what to do right and certainly what to do wrong. So my last question is, what's one simple action people can do right now to improve their relationships at work?
Pick up the phone, talk to people. Right now it's a great time. We're all fairly isolated at the end of COVID. For the most part, we're away from the office. Pick up the phone. I've been reaching out to friends and grabbing a coffee or a walk in the park or whatever we can in the last little while, and it's been great. It's not the return to normal fully, but it's spending time one-on-one. We've been isolated for a while. It's time to change that.
That's awesome. Thanks, Ian. Yeah. That's the podcast, man. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Happy to be on it.
And that was the very generous Ian Foss being a guest on the podcast. If you want to know more about Ian or follow up with him online, I'll put all that information in the show notes on relationshipsatwork.ca. If you want to keep up with every little thing we're doing, go over to our Facebook group, Relationships at Work, or our Instagram. Same name. I'm not trying to be fancy here. Same name. So thanks again for listening. Really, really appreciate it. If you have a chance, now that you've listened, maybe subscribe or give a rate and review just to make me feel better about myself. It's a nice push in the right direction. All right, you take care of yourself, and I look forward to having this conversation with you again. Take care.